right. Welcome to the show. Coyote Bloodbath, question mark? Is that how you're billing yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I also have my real name too, Rahul Rao. Hi, it's me. Hello. Hello.
Hi, Rahul Rao. I was going through submissions for Sell Your Body Show online and I was watching you today and you fucking killed it. Every time I watch it, I fall in love with it more. And I see you're
Thank you.
doing some cool stuff online. Do you mind like talking about what you're doing during quarantine and like the ways that your shows have been going?
Oh, yeah. So I suppose like every other creative person during quarantine, a lot of stuff that I had in the works got canceled. Um, so in order to still fulfill my creative itch to a certain degree, at least performing in front of people, I've been lucky to get the opportunity to like be able to, I don't know, do some shows that I wouldn't normally think of, but you get creative when you can't necessarily meet with people. I recently did a show for a poetry reading series called the Gentle Hour. It's run by the Pocket Houston, Pocket HCX on Instagram, dude named Jeffrey. Uh, that is like an early morning, Sunday morning poetry series. And
Totally
I
not
would,
your vibe, right? You're like late
I'm,
night punk rock, like.
I mean, it is weird that you say that because I went to school for creative writing. Like I went to U of H,
Oh,
and I
wow.
went through the creative writing program. Uh, and I would consider myself first and foremost like a poetry writer. A poet, I guess, has a. I don't like the word necessarily because it has a lot of very flighty implications to it. Um, but yeah, poetry as like a career has been a thing that I've been pursuing. Coyote Bloodbath, that project is kind of like a performative outlet for some of my poetry because while I am a fan of, I guess, what would people would think of as a traditional poetry reading. I also get bored of those very easily. I have a very short attention span for that kind of stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
Uh, so to that regard, I always try to keep that interesting. So, adding music to it and then adding like what would essentially be a rapping of verses, right? I think kind of helps elevate it a little bit more. Or maybe elevate's not the right word. Perhaps bring it down a little bit more in terms of accessibility. Uh,
Mm.
and it is not something that you would kind of normally consider in the what I feel is like ho hum poetry readings. But then again, I'm like I I don't know. My peers in the poetry world may disagree with me on that point, but like it is what it is. All of this is to the point of where when I got asked to do this gentle reading or gentle hour reading, normally beforehand, before this quarantine had happened, I had plans for like an entirely different gentle hour set, but because of the restrictions that we had, and much like this recording, we did it on a Zoom meeting. I tried to kind of cater the performance to a Zoom meeting, but still try to give it a certain amount of weirdness and like uh, confrontational aspect to it, even though I'm distancing myself through the internet. So to fulfill that, I just basically went around, found like a parking garage that didn't have a uh, barrier that prevented me from getting in there. I went up to the top of it and then set up my phone, much like I'm doing now, and then just like played my music out of my car and yelled poems into the phone. And I just taped down a bunch of my poems to the concrete on the parking garage. And that was pretty fun. I don't know if I would. There's a lot I would change, perhaps if I did it again. But just like I don't know, trying to do that and give the same sort of feel of a live show, or I guess yeah, feel of a live performance or a live reading of the Coyote Bloodbath stuff. The same sort of I don't know gravitas And I don't even like using that word because I think it's maybe a little too high and mighty for what I do. But like, yeah, I don't know. I think trying to emulate that through an intermediary device like a cell phone or like a computer has been the biggest challenge. But for some people, it's been easier than others. Like you're obviously doing shows and stuff, but like talk shows, and people are doing more podcasts, and more people are just putting out stuff visually as well. I think having time gives you a lot of room to let ideas like come to fruition in weird ways, and then like trying your best to execute them is half the fun of like going through the motions of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, in that regard, I'm fulfilled. Not as much as I would like to be, but perhaps it's nice that I'm kind of taking a break because,
Yeah.
or being forced to take a break rather, because I don't know, being able to relax and just play video games sometimes is cool too.
Yeah, I've been noticing like one, that my relationship with free time is complicated, and
Oh,
two, that when you're speaking about, I think what you called it was confrontational, like the energy of your work, like trying to translate that in the Sell Your Body show has been a huge part of the process, because you are so right that like like a talk show is very two-dimensional, right? Like us having an interview, that's very two-dimensional, but the work that we do in person has
yeah.
like all of these different performative layers, and that's really hard to like tell people digitally, on a screen. It's so difficult to translate that.
Yeah, and I think even in that regard, maybe like some things are easier to maybe translate than others. It's when you start combining like mixed media stuff, I think that's where like it starts becoming more of an issue, and like how do you effectively get across what you want to get across, right?
Yeah,
Um, because
without
there
like,
is.
because when it's mixed media, it's like there's something for everyone. So it's like people are going to tune out when the poem comes on, or people are going to tune out when the song comes on. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. There's always something that like having those, because it's mixed media. You are trying your best to make sure that you can get the audience's attention in one way or the other. Um, but I think to that end, I don't discount. I don't think I discount the ability of like a simple dialogue, like a chat like this, to be just as impactful. I think especially now that more people have time to listen and like
Hmm.
engage with something fully.
Yeah, I want to explore a little more like, we were talking about the energy of your work, and I'm thinking of the feeling. I think I've probably done it more than once, where I'm the one holding the poem that you're
Oh
singing
yeah.
from. Can you like describe that, and maybe like a little bit about the inspiration behind that? Because I've seen it so many times.
Okay. So in the I guess in the videos that I don't know if you'll be editing them in. I don't know what you're gonna do. Surprise me with it. But in the videos, right? In that video, I have to perform in my friend's kitchen, the people that I'm staying with right now. So that was a weird experience to do while they were cooking. Um,
So cool.
but yes, what Britt is referring to. Normally, whenever I do a Coyote Bloodbath performance, I I am like, I have a backing track with music. I have a microphone that I am yelling and talking into, and then I also have my poetry. But I don't. I have some of my poems memorized, but not all of them. So to that end, I bring my poems with me. Um, to add to the element of audience engagement that I'm already kind of seeking anyways, I will force people to hold my poems while I'm reading them. And so far, everyone's been pretty open to just holding them, because I think most people are very confused as to what's going on. Because I
And
am
force
also.
is kind of a strong word too, because you kind of just ask and people are like, hell yeah, like what is this?
Yeah, it's very a lot of the impetus behind the Coyote Bloodbath thing is that if you give someone a microphone and they're yelling, like you're kind of forced to listen to what they're saying. And if they're like talking directly to you, you can engage or not. But like, depending on what they're asking you, if it's not like something unreasonable. I think more people than not are willing to go with it. I don't know. I'm all I'm asking is for people to hold my poems. Though in performance, I will ask you in a very gruff way and maybe direct you on how to hold it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, all that is innate of kind of me trying to engage with the audience just a little bit more than simply music and like yelling things can do. And I also think it's fun to like make a person an object for like a couple minutes. I think it's really cool. Um, it gives me a little feeling of control and power besides like having a microphone and being on stage. Uh, and why not? Like if I'm gonna do all that stuff, oh, sorry, someone just sent me an Instagram message. Yeah, if I'm gonna go through the effort of making sure people pay attention, why not just like kind of make them go the extra mile, or at least me go the extra mile in trying to reach them. And I mean, some of my poems I try to make them more or less like relatable. But I think when you're kind of forced to relate to it in that little way, and again, you might be right on saying like forced is a strong word, but I don't know, when you've kind of chosen to participate and then you relate a little bit more, I think that's helpful too. At the end of the day, you got to get something from it. You got to move people or some shit. I don't know.
You gotta move people. This is
Yeah.
gonna be my favorite podcast because of like the angle of watching you with your nails. Like it looks so good.
Oh, thank you.
You
I
have
just,
really excellent nail beds. Like I envy those nail beds.
oh, hell yeah. I honestly, I used to bite my fingernails quite a lot, but I've gotten a little bit better about it over time. Um, since staying with my friends, and having access to nail polish and kind of, I don't know, nothing else to do. I didn't have a job for a while. So
Mm.
I had to make sure that I kept myself occupied. The day is long. 24 hours is a very fucking long time to do nothing.
So
So
tell
I
me a
started.
little bit about, I'm kind of curious about, you said that you were originally into poetry and so you've moved, you have this Coyote Bloodbath project, but like what else is going on for you? Like how do you like to write when it's not for Coyote Bloodbath, or does it always end up there? Or like how does that work for you?
Oh, okay. Well, so I mean, I'm sure you know this. For your listeners, I guess I also do comedy, but I don't do stand up. I work for a couple of sketch comedy groups and then like some comedy shows. I've done work for previously Micro Satan and then uh, currently Effin' Rager. Um, I do another show called You Now Have the Floor. I did that at Secret Group every month, every other month for a while. Neo Benchy, the monthly show. Uh, Occasionally Grown Up Story Time. Like I get around in other capacities as well. Those all that other stuff sort of bleeds into the Coyote Bloodbath project because if only because like um, there's lots of weird things that you end up taking from other sources when you decide to immerse yourself in different things, right?
Yeah.
Um, Certain things about timing and performance, and then ways, kind of like ways in which to set up jokes and applying that same sort of structure to poetry
Yeah,
is
I've
very
seen that from
interesting.
you. I've seen that from you. It's really funny.
Yeah,
Like when there's like a poem with a punchline, it's like, ugh.
yeah, I mean, and you can do that, and I mean, rappers do that, and modern day poetry kind of does that too. Famous like Instagram poems and shit do that all the time, and I mean, even poets of like high regard in the current scene, like Ocean Vuong and like Danez Smith and stuff, right? Um, Human Wen, like those people all kind of apply that same sort of tongue-in-cheek humor a little bit, and I think those things are important. I don't think I'm innately like a funny person. But having written for like comedy shows and then like trying to sort of flex those muscles gave me the ability to do it a little bit better.
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah,
And
I can
then,
totally like relate to because I wasn't a comedy writer. I originally was a regular writer. So
yeah.
what was the transition? Like how did you like fall into the lap of like the Connor and Ned situation? Like how did that happen?
Oh, well, so that all started. So this is crazy. Um, that all started in like whew, maybe 2011, 2012. I've known Connor. Well, so I've known Connor since high school. Um,
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
yeah, Connor and I grew up in like Cypress, Texas together. And we know there are a bunch of people actually in like the general art scene that also grew up with us as well. It's just a weird thing that happened, but like uh, Connor and I have been friends through like high school and college a little bit. We reconnected more in college, but I around like my last year of school, like my last couple semesters, that was around also around the time that like Beta Theater was starting up and like everyone was going there. Um, I was aware that Connor had done like a couple comedy shows up until this point. Not a lot of them, but he'd had like a few under his belt, and I decided to go see him. It was a pretty funny show, and I was I was dealing with a breakup at the time. I mean, as I guess all people do, but uh,
As one
I
does.
sure, yeah, I was dealing with a breakup at the time, and I was finding myself in kind of a creative slump as far as poetry was concerned.
Yeah.
And I don't know, after watching a couple of the shows and then like attending some of the events, I had a couple ideas. I thought to write a couple sketches for the show, or at least write one sketch for the show, right? Um, and Connor was like, okay, you have to be in the sketch, but you can write it and you got to pitch it to all of us. And I was like, okay, cool. This is no different from a poetry workshop where I have to read and like get my poem critiqued by everyone. Like I've done this a million fucking times. Okay. Uh, I guess what's different about a poetry workshop is that this was way more fun. I laughed like a lot. It was just a good time. Yeah. And so started doing that. What I thought would just be this thing that I put a couple weeks effort into just to get my mind off of stuff turned into this thing where I was like, oh, they're asking me back to do more stuff. Well, okay, I'm not really doing anything right now. Oh, they're asking me to do other things. Oh, okay, cool. Uh, oh, this person who's come to the shows and I sort of know tangentially has asked me to be on another show. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'll fucking do that. That's cool. And then all of a sudden, like, you do one show and then the people at that show are like, hey, we have other shows that we think you'd be good for. You're a weirdo. Then you start just in that weird way, it kind of networked out. I didn't really think I would be continuing all this up until this point, but it was kind of after a few years of committing myself to just comedy writing, and I hadn't even touched poetry in a long time. Um, when I finally came back to the project, it was like I have a new kind of purpose with it now. And there are things that I can do to make it much more enjoyable and less, still keep that confrontational edge, but kind of make it still fun and engaging and thought provoking. And I don't know, I try to apply more of a musical sense to it than I usually do, which has resulted in a lot of where the new tracks and like stuff that I've performed recently and the videos that you're showing, that's where kind of that all comes from now. Uh, Previously, Coyote Bloodbath used to just be like weird industrial beats made off of like a 90s machine, uh, like a machine from like the 90s or some shit. And then like over just like a really shitty amplifier and then me yelling over it, which is cool. I still think that's cool, but like
Yeah.
now it's a little more produced and I have more knowledge in terms of like technical stuff with like Ableton and shit like that. Being able to create the sounds that I want a little bit more. Um, that's been a lot of fun. It's been a learning process, obviously, but like quarantine time, yeah, that's been a big part of just like getting that done and like figuring out production. Being able to mix a fucking set in someone's kitchen and
Yeah.
subsequently like have it come out sounding pretty good, more or less. Maybe not, it's not everything I wanted, but like, yeah, and for what it is, like it came out really well. I mean, I also had help on it too. Shouts out to you, Ned Gale. But like, yeah, he helped me with some audio stuff and like editing that video. But yeah, I don't know, just having that period of time away was probably the best thing for me. Um, I mean, you got to have it. Distance is a form of like, you know, um, what's the word? Like it's a distance is a love language, right?
Oh yeah. Amen, dude. Tell me, like, I need my distance. That is so interesting. And I'm like, I'm actually, so there are so many questions I have from that,
Sure.
but primarily, so you were in a situation where you hadn't been, like, were you a theater kid? Like, what was your performance
Oh,
experience like? Was it just
so
like a poetry thing and then you were like, whoops, I'm an actor in a sketch show? Like, how did that happen?
okay. So I've I actually through my childhood I've done a lot of this stuff. My oh man, this is going to be a crazy line of conversation, but please
Okay, I'm
bear with
ready.
me. Um, so my parents are more or less part of a cult, and for a
Oh my
long time
God.
I
I'm
was
so excited about this.
okay. So this cult isn't that like bad or anything. There are some maybe alleged instances of like sexual abuse, but nothing ever concretely was proven. And my parents more or less still like follow the tenets of this like cult, but it's basically just Hinduism. But we also have or we had rather, a living religious like leader who was basically the reincarnation of Jesus.
Okay,
Um,
I'm with you.
yeah, but like actual Christian Jesus. So it's like Hindu mythology, but Jesus is also there.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, hey,
so,
I've looked into Hinduism and that's totally possible in that universe for sure.
oh, I mean, yeah, I get it. Like, it makes sense. He could have just been like a cool demigod or something, and I believe it. But so in that cult, right, I guess, in that religious group, we, much like a lot of churches, we meet on Sundays, right? And we sing hymns, but like, because it's Indian music, those hymns are like really kind of dramatic, super dramatic sounding, and they're kind of rhythmic and danceable.
Hell yeah.
Um,
Chanting.
there, yeah, we have lots of like instrumentation and stuff. And then there's also like events where we put on plays, like the kids will put on plays and shit. So I have a background. I was basically part of that religious group for like 14 years of my life. And I
Wow.
would sing the first Sunday of every month for those 14 years. And I would put on plays maybe like every 6 months or so, just for like different religious events. And they'd all be like religious themed plays, like, oh, this is the story of how this one God did this one thing. Or, oh, this is the story of how our religious leader did this one particular famous incident that he's known for. Um,
Wow.
Stuff like that. Uh, they're to the point of where like whenever you worship this guy, you basically set up a chair, like a very fancy chair, and like cover it in robes and like flowers and stuff, and that's his chair, and that's where he's sitting during the service in the congregation, right? um,
Wow. I love
to
it.
the point of where if a flower falls off the chair or falls off his picture, like that's set up on the altar, people take that as a sign, like, oh, he was here, God was here in this fucking kids are kids that we've converted into this church or whatever. So I singing and like playing instruments and like performing in that capacity have never been unfamiliar to me. Um, but I didn't do them in high school. In high school, I was in band. I played trombone. I mean, I still play trombone, but like, uh,
Cool.
yeah, that was my thing that I did. I didn't join theater, though I knew a lot of theater kids. And I suppose I was a lot more outgoing than I am now.
Really?
Oh, most assuredly. I said, I mean, A, smoking weed, that probably doesn't help. Um, but
Or
then
helps
B,
depending on what you're going for.
yeah, B, I kind of like, in sort of coming into my own as a person, like I uncovered a lot of deep seated anxiety and like shit that I have to deal with and like shit that I never really thought about before, but that I do think about now. Um, which I guess has resulted in like a bit of a personality shift. I mean, I'm an introvert, I suppose, but there are moments when I feel extroverted and when I feel more up to the task of being socially engaged. And I don't think that's particularly abnormal in any capacity. But yeah, like performing and stuff was not a thing that I considered in my early youth, I guess. I mean, I'm 30 now. I'll be 31 in like a couple weeks, but like,
Happy early
uh,
birthday.
thank you. So I mean, I'm not like super old, but I'm old enough to have like that period of like late teens to like mid 20s where I don't know, was just very confused about like who I was and like what my identity was, not only in terms of like my social identity, but like my racial identity, my sexual identity, um, all these things that perhaps other people had kind of like been able to take for granted, but I had to think about them and yeah, come to terms with like who I was as a person, which is still very sort of amorphous and hard to define. And I can do so in many specifics, but there's no specific like category to like put that in. But that's to say, life is that like personal journey or whatever. You learn about that shit all the time. This is more philosophical than I wanted it to be.
I'm here for it.
But yeah, having going back to performance has been very liberating. It allows me to get like attention that I kind of want, but I don't know, in a way that I can like meet it out and I don't get overwhelmed by it either. Like for as much as I like performing and for as much as I do it, there are definitely times when like it gets super fucking difficult to like put yourself out there on that level, especially after doing repeated like Coyote Bloodbath shows. The comedy shows it's a little easier because it's like they're more lighthearted and you can get into a different sort of character with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, just I don't know, trying to sort of manage that is always the hardest part. Oh fuck!
Yeah.
I feel like I got off topic. I don't know.
No,
Just
no, not at all. I mean, we're fucking winging it. I
okay.
I had, yeah, the question was around like your relationship with performance, so you nailed it.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm surprised I remembered that. And I'm interested kind of in, so the way that you talk about like energetically the difference between Coyote Bloodbath and being a character in a sketch, like that is really interesting to me. And I think, for a lot of people, like sketch writing is kind of the holy grail because being able to write dialogue is really one of the few ways that people can monetize and make a career out of comedy by being a joke writer or a sketch writer or like, being a writer for like these huge productions. But what
Mhm.
we experience in the DIY scene is not necessarily a situation where we're writing for other people. It's where we're just kind of like being ourselves and kind of like trying to characterize ourselves. So I guess like to distill that into a question, it's like, when you're performing as Coyote Bloodbath, like what is happening for you? Is that like you're kind of like turning up the volume on your own personality? Are you like exploring the relationship with the poem that you wrote? Like what is that like?
Okay, so I guess for me, the main differences in like performative styles, or at least what it comes down to, and what I'm trying to emulate with either. Um, Comedy, yeah, like we said, it's definitely on that more easygoing. Though I definitely put my own sense of weirdness on it, like everyone does, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Where that differs for me in terms of the Coyote Bloodbath performances is with Coyote Bloodbath, those are a lot of what I'm saying is very much tied to like my own emotional well-being. Um, at the end of the day, these are simply like mantras or affirmations that I use to kind of like go about the world, or at least navigate the world in the very uncertain terms that entails. But like, okay, I have a poem that is called "That Feel When," uh, and it's written kind of like a 4chan post. Um, but the point of that poem is to basically like highlight what it feels like to kind of go to a place with the intention of meeting people and like wanting to meet people and like be more out there, but then ending up just being stuck in your head about like being out there. um
Story
that
of my life.
poem yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing, and there's a lot of things that happen when you like kind of get stuck inside of yourself about just like going trying to meet people and go out and like just being social and like maybe even trying to pretend to be normal and stuff, right? um and that's kind of relatable. What I think is harder to emulate, which is what I strive to do in the musical aspect, and at least in terms of what sound is capable of, is the very sort of frantic feeling of what it is to like feel those things, right?
Mm.
Because simply saying them and articulating them is one thing, but then trying to put someone who has never really thought about a moment like that, maybe they're just like really good about social situations, or more realistically, they don't think about them as much as like I do. So to put them in that kind of mind state, like you have to, I have to yell it because it's important that you know that I'm screaming all these things in my head. B, I have to put it to like music that elicits like an element of tension. Um, so I have a song that I made, which is like a bunch of uh, like very short string passages that are just like rising in notes, um, along with just like this, starts off with this very sort of syncopated, almost like a cumbia dance hall beat that's just like a four on the floor dance hall beat by the end of it. It's a simple repetitive loop, right? But it's also designed to like elicit that the way that in the way that I recite the poem and the way that the poem is on the page, like it's just a very straightforward escalation of things to a cathartic release of your feelings. But then in the poem, like you don't necessarily release your feelings, because in real life, like not everything goes as well as it does in poetry. So yeah, in some ways it'll end anticlimactically. But those are things that I try to think about when I'm performing as Coyote Bloodbath. Um, and there's more of an emphasis on uh, not only simply like when I say a word, but it's also like the diction and choice of words, the way in which I choose to like pronounce and like enunciate, and like volume control, all those things that are also very important to music, that facilitate understanding of music, right?
Mm.
I feel very sort of like high-minded, like fucking hoity-toity, talking about what is basically sad rapping if you were to watch it.
Well, Well, what I find interesting, and this is actually why I enjoy speaking with people so much, is like there are definitely like different levels of awareness about the art that people are making. And so
Mhm.
like there are plenty of people that make art, but there are not a whole lot of people that are taking like a meta perspective of the art that they're making. And I think that sound design is a huge place where there are a lot of people that are aware of the that are considering the response to their art. Stand up, even though it's kind of lowbrow, has that sense of understanding the response to their art. And so
Yeah,
there are like these mediums, and poetry is one too, where it kind of has an echo. If you're listening to the echo as well, then you kind of get that other level understanding. So like when you say high minded, like that's not a jab, like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
kind of in nature when you're combining poetry, comedy, and music, especially like sound design music, not just like creating a song, but creating a
yeah.
sound design for a poem. Like that's something that requires a lot of layers.
Yeah. I do agree with you on that part. I don't know. At the end of the day, it's all a certain amount of tedium to get at a
Yeah.
very like I don't know a very specific point that is also very like niche in its execution. Um, I don't know. Yeah, fuck, man. Damn,
Fuck,
that's
man.
crazy. I no, but it is good to hear you say that because like it feels for a long time I've been like beating myself up about like it sort of feels like things aren't like fully there or like good enough for sometimes. But then it's like, yeah, to understand that I am putting myself out there in so many different ways for that one specific like effect that it's like, yeah, I can't be everywhere at once. So don't try to strive for like insane standards or something like that, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I think like there's also this message like when we see art happening, particularly very good art, we kind
Mhm.
of have the idea that it's a lot more casual than it actually is. Like people put a lot of hours into the work they do, even a stand-up set. And with
Yeah.
Sell Your Body Show, like curating and putting things in order and creating the vibe, like even just to create an experience for people requires like a lot of work. My curiosity would be kind of like when did it become apparent that like music was going to be a part of your projects?
Oh.
Like how did that occur?
So, I mean, I guess in a weird way, I've always wanted to have like a musical project. Um, and that sad rapping thing isn't like too far off because I do take inspiration from like rap and hip hop. But I don't know. My approach to A is simply like writing in terms of like musicality of writing, whether it be like a traditional 16 or just like a stanza of a poem or something like that. Um, those are kind of, I approach them the same way. Uh, Setting it to music is honestly maybe the more interesting part of it for me. Writing the poem itself, like I've had a sufficient education and a lot of practice. Like I'm pretty good at it at writing, but like, um, oh yeah, whatever. But what I gotta big up myself on at least like one thing, right?
Hey, if you're gonna if you're gonna get an education, you better fucking brag about it. Like that is the
Yeah,
important part.
yeah. So like I know what I'm doing when it comes to writing. The music thing, I'd always wanted to tinker with something like that, but in execution, I always thought it sounded way too close to just like rap music and just like traditional rap music. And while I don't think those are bad, I'm also the type that's like I have to be different, you know.
Yeah.
I didn't want to try to like emulate. I wanted to emulate some of people that I like in certain ways, but I also wanted to ensure that like I'm fully in my own lane. Like I don't want to really overlap with someone in that regard. And even to that end, there are several people that I think I would like overlap with. Um, and there are certain songs. One of the songs that I do is actually a a personal cover. They're technically two covers on the videos that I sent you. The last two songs are their beats from an artist named Billy Woods.
Okay.
He is like, I think he's one of like the best rappers ever. A friend of mine, a guy by the name of Tim that I used to work with, he introduced me to him like a couple years ago. So good, but the way that he raps is very sort of like in a similar kind of fashion. He is just kind of speaking at you, and sometimes the words rhyme and you catch it, but more often than not, he's just kind of saying these very strange things that if you were to break them apart and really like think about them, what he's describing is like a very harsh reality that he lives as like a black man, you know. And I think that's very like interesting. Another dude I like is a guy named Quelle Chris. He had an album last year called Guns that was all about like gun violence and the way it affects like certain communities, and specifically like the black community, right? But like again, framed in a way that is simultaneously relatable and yet really novel. Like it's very funny, it's very clever. Like they're putting a lot of thought into it, the same amount of thought that like, you know, Rupi Kaur puts into her poems. Like she's basically writing rap bars, you know. So in that regard, I was just like, okay, why not try to apply some of that similar sort of methodology to what I do now? And like those two Billy Woods songs that I cover, I've rewritten the lyrics for them. That Groundhog's Day song is almost like I use the hook. I wake up and smoke weed, and I use the beat for it as well. But it's like my reality and his are not the same. So I tried to do my best to like capture the same sense of anxiety that I feel that sort of forces me to like wake up and smoke weed and like get high and do all that shit, right? Oh, hi, kitty.
He's kind of trapped a little bit, so.
Well, hopefully he'll be fine.
So that kind of brings me to a little bit, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, and if you don't, we can move on, but I'm like curious about, I mean, like I've seen poetry as activism a lot, and I've seen hip hop as activism a lot. Like, do you feel that kind of association when you're doing your work? Like, do you feel pressure to be an activist? Do you feel pressure to express that kind of information?
Okay. Here, I'm going to take this outside while I smoke a cigarette, if you don't mind.
I don't know.
But it is interesting that you mentioned that, because the name Coyote Bloodbath is actually in reference to hold up. So the name Coyote Bloodbath is actually it is kind of like a 3-part reference. One, it's like my PlayStation username. 2, it is like a reference to a very specific video game. But 3, most importantly, it is a coyote bloodbath is like a weird Midwestern like slang term for a pile of dead coyotes that have been killed because you were trying to cull the coyote population in like a farming community and stuff.
Oh, wow.
I didn't realize for the longest time when I started using the moniker, I was just like, oh, sounds hardcore. This is tight. I'm into it. And then finding out it's a term for just like, you know, so I can see the argument for it being like a necessary amount of slaughter, right? But it's still like a relentless slaughter of like animal life, that to the point of where like Midwestern wives are fucking saying, hey, don't go near the Route 35. There's a coyote bloodbath at the corner. Flies are everywhere.
Wow.
So to that end, a good amount of my work kind of centers on environmentalism, though I wouldn't necessarily say that's all of it. but there are moments of it that I'm definitely like, I do want to point out the existence of the fact that, like, you know, we are really fucking up that the place that we live. We're fucking up this planet. Like, there's a lot of really awful things that companies and people do, and I talk about those things, but I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm an activist. I'm active in wanting to promote solutions to those problems, but I don't know if necessarily I'm the person that like can lead the revolution. Maybe they'll play my music there or something, but like I don't think so. I more am interested in a little bit of the personal accountability side of it because
Mhm.
like
Amen.
at the end of the day, like if and you know I'm still working on it too. Like if there's things that we can do as like individuals to maybe slow things down, like why not try to do them? And like it's very some things are just very little and it's like requires minimal effort and yet it's hard to do things sometimes, but like if we can all make a concerted effort, I think that's important. um
Yeah.
I don't know, but that's more of my main takeaway with like activist stuff. And I suppose speaking as like a person of color on that aspect of it, right? I do talk about being a brown person, an Indian person, quite a lot in my poetry. Though maybe not to the extent of that other people do. Um, I more so talk about it in terms of more of like how others perceive me as a brown person. And to be fair, like I'm a very unique brown person, I guess. I'm very tall, like I'm a big man. I have a lot of tattoos and shit. Like I can cast an intimidating figure, um, and perhaps wantonly so. So I can understand a certain amount of aggression that people throw my way. Um, but that still doesn't like excuse the aggression that people throw to people of color just generally. And like I do make a note of it. And to be fair, like the amount of the amount of people who just say like super audacious things to me is yeah, there's so much stuff to just pull from that's like crazy and like I get to talk about that's fucking absolutely crazy. And like it apparently seems that I am one of few people, or I am of a section of people that this happens to regularly, and it's very relatable for folks. Um, so yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm an activist, though I am. I promote an active decision to be made about like people being fucking racist and like people saying people saying racist shit to you all the time. Not even like overtly, of course, like microaggressive stuff, right? But then like the ways in which people say racist shit to be like funny and like have jokes and shit. Oof. Yeah. I mean, fuck, having to do that in like any aspect of life is weird. And then having to do that when a lot of my poetry is also about like being lonely and having to navigate that aspect of it while dating, like, ooh, that's another. People said some wild shit to me in dating, and that's fucking insane. So things to pull on. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's like, I mean, as a white person, I have no idea what that's like, but I can kind of like empathize with the feeling of like how much of this identity is like political and how much of it is just me like expressing, who I am and what happens to me. And I think like listening to art with that perspective can be like valuable, like when you're expressing, things that, especially environmentalism right now,
yeah,
like gosh, and that's like environmentalism, racism, like all of those things that are difficult for people to hear. I think that they kind of politicize it and make it into activism, and I think like what you're expressing is really authentic and genuine, that it's not necessarily about activism, it's about expressing your
yeah.
actual perspective.
I I would say that those things are inherently political in nature, and so I don't think they can necessarily be more politicized than they already are. Um, but yes, I would. I would sort of agree with that sentiment of like yeah, this is purely the existence that I live, or the existence that I am trying to show. And whether or not that is like a grander statement on society is, I don't know, maybe that's up to you as a person who interprets it. I am not necessarily trying to imprint those things, but they are, again, it brings it back to like comedy and other forms of writing. They are simply like observations that you make and stuff. Um, those innate, or those very sort of particular observations that are only inherent to you, that you make about the world, and that are only can be really colored by your specific viewpoint on how you see things. So, perspective, all that shit.
We're actually coming up on an hour, which that fucking flew by. So do
Oh
you have
wow.
any like practices or like creative restorative processes that like keep you writing or keep you creating? Like what does your process look like?
Mm-hmm. So a big one of my mentors gave me a very good piece of advice, and that was to set an alarm, which is so it's very kind of silly, but I set an alarm to remind me to just like write every day. And I don't necessarily write every day, but it does remind me to write. And so maybe like I'll let a day or two go by where I just want to relax or something. But that alarm definitely like helps in terms of setting a goal. And now like when everyone's so full of free time, it makes it perfect to kind of just like switch up the monotony a little bit.
Mm.
um, Other things I'm doing, I don't know, just trying to keep myself occupied. uh, that's a big thing. Creatively, I don't know, keeping yourself occupied is a big part of it. Take care of your mental health. I don't know, take meaningful breaks. That's important too. Don't feel bad if you don't get stuff done today. Like, we're in a weird panic state. Like, it's all good. I don't know. Staying active is like hard, and I'm not good at it. So, yeah, I just try my best, and we can all try our best. And that's the only real advice I have about it.
Do your best. When you write, are you the kind of person that like scrambles for a notebook or like are you at your laptop? Like what does writing look like for you?
So I have a series of notebooks that I use. So some have like different moods, I guess, attached to them, or just based on availability or what's like around me at the time. But yeah, I have a notebook that I use more or less. But then after I'm done with my notebook, I'll pick and choose what I want and then type it up. And typing it up is usually where I do my second or third edit of a poem. Um, and yeah, and then after that, that's like more or less the finished product, unless I come up with an idea just like later on down the road, which happens occasionally. Some of the videos that you have now, like those songs have been changed like a little bit since I performed them for like other shows, or just like on a whim because I was bored or something.
Yeah. So when you're talking about drafts and stuff, like should we look forward like to a book from you? Like what's gonna
So I'm
happen?
the actual next big Coyote Bloodbath project, and fine, fuck it, I'll announce it here on live. There's an EP that I'm trying to release sometime probably near the late end of May.
Oh,
Maybe like,
wow, that's like coming up.
yeah, my big thing is that I need to find a place to record vocals, maybe even someone to like master my stuff. So if this comes out before then, like, hey, hit me up. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to just like 1, 2 take this, and I just need someone on the boards to like really check my shit and like give me the feel of what I want.
Yeah,
But
that's
even then,
awesome.
like, just I could be into doing some creative recording techniques. But yeah, hey, I need some help. I'm not good with that kind of stuff. So shouts out to anyone who knows. Please send me a message at Coyote Bloodbath.
Yeah, go
Also,
follow you online. And I love first of all, I love the idea of an album. I'm so excited for that. That's going to be
oh, thank you.
rad. And I do think that there's like a point that some of us reach creatively where it's like, okay, time to collaborate. And then that can be like a hurdle in itself. You know what I mean? So
Uh-huh.
especially right now, goodness.
Yeah, for sure. Oh shit. Oh, my phone is gonna die soon.
Well,
But
we're
hey,
done. This is it. So we're going to follow you at Coyote Bloodbath.
yeah. Also, my Venmo is at Coyote Bloodbath. Fucking please send me some money. Like your
Send
boy.
Coyote Bloodbath some money.
Yeah, please, I gotta smoke weed. I gotta do my nails. Like I gotta buy energy drinks. Like, come on, guy.